Hey everyone, if you're watching this video, that means that the Rod of Correction, R.O.C. Future Class album is out. Presumably you've listened to it, you have favorable feelings, maybe, you would even go as far as to say you like the album. So before we begin the video, let me start by saying thank you. There is essentially an endless amount of music you could be listening to out there. So for you to take the time to listen to our record, genuinely, it means a lot to me. So thank you. What I wanted to do with this video is give kind of a director's commentary of sorts and explain the lyrical content of the album, sort of where my mind was and all that when I wrote these songs. When I was a kid, the lyric explanations in hardcore records were a big deal, right? Like on inserts, you'd get explanations kind of breaking down the inspiration and meaning and historical context behind 30-second song. And as I get older and I get kind of a better historical context for music, right, I realize what a unique phenomenon that is, or maybe even was, in hardcore. Because most artists in general, they want their work to be vague, right? And sort of whatever meaning you get out of this is up to you. I understand why an artist would want to keep their work open to interpretation, but like I said, I feel hardcore should be unique in its presentation, right? It should stand apart from other mediums, no coded messages and all of that. So given that it's kind of wasteful to print some huge insert for the record beyond just the lyrics, and given that most people will likely be listening to the album digitally, a video like this seemed like the most effective way to put these song explanations out there to anyone who may or may not be interested. Let's just go with may be interested. How about that? No, may not involved. I'm here at my record store, Standards, in Vista, California. I'm doing this here with my buddy Keith. He's doing the filming and editing and all that, lest anyone think I'm in some bombed out hovel going rogue on this one. My name's Colin, by the way. I sing for the band Rod of Correction. Hopefully as this goes on and we get into the record track by track, all this will make more sense. Without further ado, let's start with track number 1, City Night Survivor. So I really like this song as an opener. I feel it's a good presentation musically of what the rest of the record has in store. In a sense, it's like if we lose you with this one, when we get into the more indulgent, let's say, ideas later on in the record, then you're really going to be lost. Likewise, if you can put up with this song, it's like, all right, you're cool, you passed the test, come on in. When we first started writing the song, we called it Batmobile amongst ourselves, because there's sort of this sleekness to it. It revs up in the middle. There's this kind of like forward momentum. So that imagery of like urban streets was kind of baked into the song, even on a musical level. And at some point in writing the lyrics for the song, I was walking through a city I had never been in. And I noticed that naturally I was on more alert than I was normally, right? Like even on a physiological level, my body was like reacting to being in an environment I wasn't used to. Then I was thinking of this trope I really enjoy in songs in general, really. I think ABBA's If It Wasn't for the Night is probably the best example of this, where you're fine during the day, but when you're alone with your thoughts at night, that's when this terror or sadness or whatever bleak ideas can kind of maybe get the best of you. They start to attack your head. So if you combine these two ideas, right, like your mind being this kind of city landscape, and as you explore these different alleyways and side streets, when you wander down these passageways you probably have no business being on, internally you sort of have to be on high alert, just like you would if it was a real world area you're not familiar with. Hence that line, around each corner and every shadow, how do you combat the predator within your mind? Because that's what it feels like, kind of dicking around in these areas in your head that you really have no business being in. There can be real threats to your safety in there. Structurally, I vaguely recall the song being based on Slayer's Die by the Sword, and also the chorus. The chorus has these like really cool diva vocals on it. There was a time when we were planning out the album, there was going to be a lot more of those diva kind of backing vocals throughout. T-Rex's Zinc Alloy record was a huge inspiration there. But ultimately, we went with a kind of less is more approach, right? And so shout out to Christine Umali for delivering the goods on that one. Blind Hate and Fear. Generally speaking, I try not to make my lyrics too topical. I try to focus on kind of universal themes as opposed to addressing specific world events. That said, admittedly, this is an election year song. It was kind of the direct result of my frustrations being bombarded with the kind of scapegoating propaganda the right wing of American politicians seem particularly fond of employing. Perhaps fond because, you know, it's a very successful method, honestly, and I think you'll see fascism in full swing in America today. And I think it's a direct result of this kind of conservative wing and their oligarch pals stoking fears against minority groups. Immigrants, trans people, Muslims, anyone who's up today, they demonize them and then they promise you safety from this group in exchange for consolidated, unchecked power. It's a very old political game, of course. I think of like Bob Dylan's Only a Pawn in Their Game. It reads like current events if you listen to that song, and it's half a century old. It's dealing with these kind of similar themes. And I think it's this oldness that makes the tactics so revolting to me. I'm at the age where I was getting bombarded with the cries of welfare queens growing up and being told how people on social benefits were bankrupting America. Meanwhile, my mom was on welfare. She was cleaning houses on the side. She was kind of hustling to make life comfortable for us. So even at that young age, I was shown the disparity of what the media and politicians say reality is and the lived experience of being in one of those vilified groups. So there's this election cycle going on, or some flare-up of paranoia, or some new moral panic, and as the title says, all I see is a populace so easily manipulated into feeling blind hatred and fear for some outside group, and without fail, this hate and fear is spearheaded by some other group trying to secure power, which in and of itself is just a means for helping their financial backers secure their wealth. Seeing the cycle repeat over and over in my lifetime, it's just repugnant. It's disgusting. Ultimately, when confronted with these people who are so easily used, so easily duped, it's like the song kind of says it, right? Like, I don't want to hear you speak. Your opinions are utterly worthless. You're a coward. You'll eat up whatever shit the people in power serve you. So all this song is I'm kind of purging this negativity, right? I'm trying to, just get this out of my system. A direct response to being bombarded with this propaganda. This is also has one of my favorite riffs on the record, that Billy Gibbons kind of thing that's going on under the solo. When the key changes, that's just like a perfect moment right there. Next song, Justifier. So prior to this album, almost every R.O.C. song had been based on a comic book in one way or another. And I toyed with the idea of picking a single comic to use as the basis for like an overarching concept for this, our first proper album. I was reading Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga around the time we were writing this, and it seemed like that was big enough to suit the task, but ultimately I gave up after a few songs. The Fourth World stuff works really good visually, but when you translate that into the lyrics, it doesn't quite work out the same way. This song is kind of a vestigial limb of that Fourth World concept. Justifiers in that world were these faceless mobs that were under the control of glorious Godfried and Darkseid's anti-life equation. And as I say that out loud, it reminds me of why I scrapped the whole Fourth World concept as an album premise. But nonetheless, I have to admit, Jack Kirby has always used the visual language of comics to portray these broad social concepts, and that image of the faceless mob as controlled by a propagandist was very prescient for so much of what we see in our modern era. And I felt compelled to use that imagery for inspiration. In that regard, it's a fairly straightforward anti-groupthink song, just kind of propped up by the dramatic visuals of Kirby's original story. I'm very proud of the chanting part we have in the middle. That's a direct bite of Accept's Princess of the Dawn. Also maybe a little bit of inspiration coming from the Burbs, and I know my Burbs heads already understand that chanting scene. Anyway, I know it sounds like this, like, it was meant to sound at least like this, throng of cultists chanting in the shadows, but it's just me, doing a spooky voice, and we doubled it up and kept doubling it up till it sounded really cool. Like a lot of things you'll hear on this song, on this record, I mean, the effect is really cool, but if you saw us recording it, it's absolutely silly. Future Class. So Greg had the phrase Future Class as a title for an unreleased Cold Stare song that he brought to the record, and I took it upon myself to sort of reverse engineer the title, try to figure out exactly what a future class would be. And I took future class to be an economic strata, like middle class, working class, something like that, where the future component would of course derive from one's point of origin on a space-time continuum. In other words, someone from the future whose wealth inherently held an inflated value due to factors like inflation, resource scarcity, technology, bartering, so on and so forth. That would make us, which is to say the denizens of the present, kind of subjugated, with the time travelers being our oppressors. It's not the meatiest concept, but I do see it as like a tables will turn story, kind of a way for maybe Western civilization to finally get their comeuppance after exploiting the third world as cheap vacation destinations. Maybe that's how the people in the future would see us, as they rob us of our resources in this scenario. Fun idea, fun concepts to just brighten your day, right? Musically, I do think this stands out as like just a really good minute-long UK 82 track. Perfect balance to the more kind of heady musical ideas that we have going on elsewhere in the album, and kind of shows we could still play straightforward punk if we wanted to. Also, on almost every song on here, you'll find some kind of like production razzle-dazzle. This one, we left it flat, let it be, and sometimes you gotta know when to leave well enough alone, and I think that method served this song quite well. Set Free. We are going back to the well on this one. We're doing another straight comic book adaptation. This time we're focusing on the first few issues of Sandman, which is my favorite arc of the series, if only for the Sam Keith art. I'll take this time to maybe talk about why I adapt so many comics to lyrics. My fascination with adapting other mediums to lyrics comes from the Misfits. I think Glenn understood better than anyone how to incorporate imagery and fragments of film into a song without it being a beat-for-beat retelling of the plot, right? Like you think of a song like Horror Business, it's evocative of this kind of grimy, neurotic feeling that you would experience when you watch the movie Psycho, but it isn't like bound to the plot in a really literal way, right? Danzig as a songwriter is, just as an aside, like an incredibly underrated writer in that regard. Also, I think Anthrax would adapt material a lot more bluntly. In a sense, I think they kind of gave me permission to use comics as a reference point. From the beginning of the band, R.O.C., I looked at 80s Anthrax lyrics to sort of set the tone for our songs. I feel their lyrics from that period addressed social issues, but with a kind of everyman newsstand approach rather than being too preachy. And that's always been my goal, even if I don't always necessarily hit the mark, right? So the last thing that when adapting, you have to understand the core idea of the source material. What is the foundation of the story that calls out to you, right? I've been obsessed with that first Sandman issue since I was a kid. I could take or leave a bunch of the series, really, but that section there is awesome. And in it, this Aleister Crowley-like magician guy, he summons Morpheus, the god of dreams, kind of by accident, and like traps him via, sorcery shit, right? And his thinking, the Crowley guy, he's like, well, if I trap this guy, he'll be at my command, right? But Morpheus, he is this immortal, endless being, right? So he has a totally different understanding of mortality. He's like, I'll just wait and I'll be dead silent if something goes awry. And he gets out and has revenge on things. So it doesn't work out well for our captor, right? It's a fun read, but what is it actually about? I would say it's a great morality tale about not presuming dominion over something that can outlive you. And if you want to put an ecological spin on that, for instance, I'd say that's a reasonable take. But I'd also say there's a lesson there for the one being trapped, right? If you kind of can just bide your time and retain your dignity while you're in captivity, you can kind of turn it around. It's sort of an optimistic song in that regard, or optimistic story, which is why it speaks to me. Production-wise, one of the biggest doses of razzle-dazzle you'll get on the song. Greg's synth arrangements are insane, and that part in the end with all the ambient racket. Once again, this is one of those things that sounds really cool, but I'm just in a supply closet banging stuff around, and we layered it out a bunch. I'm really glad no visual footage of this exists, because I would be very embarrassed. Death Sentence. The lyrics for Death Sentence came about because Greg had this idea for the chorus. All he gave me was it would go like death sentence, da da da, and I used that as kind of a springboard for the rest of the song. Around the same time, my shrink had me do this exercise where I was supposed to make some sort of creative project inspired by my earliest memories. This exercise had me thinking about my elementary school days, where I could first remember feeling like an outsider and having an awareness and contempt for the social structure I was in. I think this tied in with the death sentence concept, as even then I remember feeling a kind of inevitability or fatalism tied with class. Like the whole education system, at least for poor working class schools, is to just prep these kids, of which I count myself as one, for a life of drudgery. What I was feeling, but I didn't have the words for back then, is that we were just being incubated for this life of manual labor or military service. So when I say in this cosmic war there will always be more need for skilled assassins, that's just like sci-fi or heavy metal speak for how the underclass are truly harvested through poverty as fodder for the military industrial complex, truly bred to kill in that sense. And of course, I'm an adult now, I have a certain distance from that system. But when I look back at the culture of brutality I was raised in, and utter common and mundane brutality, I should mention, it's astonishing to me that I was able to retain a sense of self. It's astonishing that anyone can survive the unnecessary cruelty of our culture, I suppose. I mean, just that title, Death Sentence, it's like we live in this country where our government can straight up murder any of us after what they call due process, and this is passed off as justice. It's an absolutely insane and inhuman practice, but it's accepted as just this background static atrocity and indelible aspect of the American justice system. On a lighter note, that I want out, fuck you line, that comes from some graffiti that's carved into the cement in the sidewalk in my neighborhood. I always wanted to use it in a song, and let's say that this is the perfect riff to match such a highbrow social commentary. I should also mention that Gabi from Violencia gave us some extra spice on the choruses on this one, so shout out again to Gobi for delivering the goods on that one. Evil Force. This is one of those tracks that kind of came together through kismet, if you will. I just came to practice, and Sam and Greg were working on this song that had a very Merciful Fate feel to it. And I think Merciful Fate, because King Diamond is like such a huge presence in the band, people don't appreciate how good Fate were at like going riff to riff and like kind of crafting songs with a good dynamic. I think in that regard, maybe they're the only band that really understood the Black Sabbath approach to riff dynamics. And regardless of why it reminds me of Merciful Fate, I feel like if you're doing a Merciful Fate sounding song, you need a similar kind of horror ambiance to the lyrics. And coincidentally, I was playing this game, The Uninvited, for the NES, which is this port of the Macintosh point and click game. On the surface, it's a very cliche haunted house video game, but I think what sticks out about it is that it's not a situation where there's like a ghost haunting a house that needs to be expelled, but rather that the house sort of hosts this horde of undead, right? And if you spend too long in the house, you become one of them. maybe it's a little far-fetched to take this like deep meaning from an old NES game, right? But I think you can use this as a metaphor for any situation that's sort of corrosive, right? So the central question of the song is, can you resist the evil force? Can you resist these corrosive elements of your environment long enough to survive? A lot of these lyrics do come from direct dialogue within the game. I think the fancy word for that is reappropriation, right? So this is one of these, so a good chunk of these lyrics are indeed reappropriated from the game itself. Blood in My Eyes is kind of another fourth world concept. It's based loosely on at least a visual of the Alien monster from the comic, this four-armed berserker thing. My thought process was to just write a kind of stream of consciousness lyrics, right? Just simple, violent words that sounded good together without any real deeper meaning. There may have been a pinch of like that old Cleveland hardcore inspiration lyrically, but that's going to be in just about anything I write, really. Not all these songs have broad social commentaries. Sometimes you just see a cool Jack Kirby drawing and you go with what feels right. And that's what felt right on this one. Off With His Head's lyrics were inspired by exactly two things: Prince Buster and Dave Mustaine. The Mustaine part came from the last time I went on a real deep dive with the Megadeth discography. I walked away really envious of the way that Dave performs his lyrics. There's a sort of drama where he plays this Dave Mustaine character that's foaming at the mouth, and I really appreciated that. It's certainly a lot more fun, right, than just trying to yell as loud as you can every song. So I wanted to play a character with this song using Dave's delivery as a guiding light of sorts. As for Prince Buster, he had this song Judge Dredd, in which Prince Buster is the judge and various rude boys are brought before him and he hands out harsh sentences. The song was actually like really huge in the Rocksteady era, and it was big enough to where every era of reggae has kind of done its own version of this Judge Dredd trope. I wanted to use this to kind of punish the posers in hardcore right now, very in a tongue-in-cheek kind of fashion. I arbitrarily picked two annoying kind of people as the victims, the bootleggers and kind of new jacks, if you will. If it's not already apparent, I'm not like serious about these issues. It's not a big concern of mine. I just thought these vague caricatures would make for funny targets. Figured if it wasn't obvious already, I'd throw in that David Lee Roth banter in the middle as sort of a lampshade on top of a lampshade. Believe it or not, we did a lot of different takes on that and going over, exactly what effects to use on Jared's voice to get the Ted Templeman and Unchained part right. So, and I cannot believe I snuck a Wishbone Ash reference in there. Truly, I don't know who this is for, but listen to the Wishbone Ash song "Lady Whiskey" and tell me it doesn't make sense to say give them a little bit of that Wishbone Ash before a double guitar attack. I think this solidifies that they let me get away with just a little bit too much on this record. Psyberslaughter. Speaking of getting away with too much, Psyberslaughter is my attempt at a proper piece of fiction built from the ground up that I wanted to turn into lyrics. Proper OC, if you will. Or so I thought, but we'll get into that later. The premise is based on this rumor I heard about the band Magma, where the members of the band would beef with each other. So when they did, they would go to their own castles and just kind of like wage psychic wars with each other. And as I say that out loud, it just sounds, completely ridiculous. It has to be fake or whatever. But that image of, psychic warfare conducted from the castles of these wizards is just too evocative enough for me to ignore. And I guess if I was really trying to run with that theory, the next idea would be for them to build armies and have these warring factions, right? And of course, the ideal army or soldier in the psychic war would be robots because they're immune to the psychic attack. So now you have this great imagery to play with that evokes the dichotomy between the mental plane and the material, the sacred and the profane. I thought I really cooked with this one. I finally came up with an idea of my own, didn't bite off a comic or anything, but then I watched the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon. I realized I basically just laid out the premise of that show, right? There's multiple times if you watch the Star Wars Clone Wars series, where the Jedi can't use their mind tricks to manipulate the clankers. Which is like the whole point of the song. I've been a Star Wars fan my whole life, and I never even made the connection that the robots are a perfect foil to the mind wizards, even after writing a song about that exact subject. So shout out to George Lucas. I respect you, my king. I'm sorry I accidentally stole the premise to your cartoon, but here we are. Return to Dust. This is a logical song to end the album with. It closes out with a big crescendo. Lyrically, I'm going back to the playbook of swiping from comics. We're going off of Cerebus #1 this time. Cerebus is a series I've read through a handful of times. I would call myself Cerebus devotee, but this first issue is such a perfect self-contained story. I thought it would make for a good lyrical subject matter, just focusing on that one story, right? Essentially, Cerebus is this barbarian for hire. He's a Conan parody, but he's drawn as an aardvark. It was from the 70s, so just, like roll with it, right? So he's this barbarian type. He gets hired by these guys to storm this wizard's lair and steal the flame jewel. And Cerebus is like, okay, just give me this pouch of gold and I'll do it. As he gets there, he goes to the castle. It's filled with skeletons and, dragons and fantasy type shit, right? Cerebus gets through it all relatively fearlessly because he knows these are just illusions, right? None of these monsters are real. He gets to the sorcerer himself, slices him up, steals a jewel, tosses it to the guy that hires him, says, all right, give me the gold, right? And as the sorcerer dies, everything in the castle starts to crumble. Cerebus gets his gold, and the guy who paid him are like, why are you taking this bag of gold? Like, you have this jewel, we could, this is worth so much more than a pouch of gold. And of course, Cerebus, he knows the whole time that the flame jewel was just another one of the sorcerer's illusions. All those monsters, all that shit, that was just sort of the sorcerer creating these distractions for everyone. And as the illusion fades, the flame jewel, it turns into like an apricot pit or something, right? And so Cerebus is left with the gold. So it's a very simple story, but I think it illustrates this grand moral of how important it is to discern truth from illusion. And of course, ideally, you find this out before all those illusions around you turn to dust, as it were. And that's the album. Everyone involved worked really hard to bring this record to you. The whole project feels very special to me. It's very grand in scope. I really did intend this record to be listened to over and over again. We've all listened to it a lot in the mixing and production of it. I hope the video enhances your experience with the record. You can revisit it with all this extra knowledge here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Peace.